Kids Book Fest takes place on the ancestral, traditional, and unceded indigenous territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and the traditional homeland of the Wendat, Anishinaabe, and the Haudenosaunee Nation. The festival highlights the voices of authors, storytellers, and illustrators from across the country who are important and deserve to be heard. They've taken their time to create art and now they're here to share with you. So what will you do with what you hear and learn? How can you use the lessons you learned today and throughout the year to be a leader in your community? Wherever you're watching this event, we hope that you find it engaging and thought-provoking. We hope that at Fold Kids Book Fest, you witness and experience the incredible power of stories.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tony Duval, and I'm the volunteer coordinator at the Fold. I'm very excited to be your host for today. This event will run for about 60 minutes. And we wouldn't be able to have these lovely events without the support from our sponsors. It's my pleasure to introduce our authors. M.T. Khan is a speculative fiction author with a penchant for all things myth, science, and philosophy. She is the author of Amir and the Jinn Princess. Emily Varga is a YA fantasy author whose debut novel, For She Is Wrath, is a Pakistani-inspired Count of Monte Cristo retelling, out with Macmillan. And we're excited to introduce our moderator for this event. Ameema Saeed is a professional bookworm and bookstagrammer at Read with Memes. She's a book reviewer, a sensitivity reader, a book buyer at Indigo Books and Music, and the book's editor for She Does the City. Please welcome Maida, Emily, and Ameema.
Hello.
Hi, everyone.
Thank you for having us.
Hello. Sorry about that. Hello. Welcome, Maida, and welcome, Emily. I'm so excited to be here with both of you. I'm a big fan. I've read both of your books.
Oh, yay.
I brought props.
Ooh, they both look so beautiful together.
Right?
It should come in a package.
Yeah,
Agree.
exactly.
Oh my gosh, I would love that. I've actually been, the last few years, I've really been actively seeking books by Pakistani authors and by South Asian authors and just trying to find and um, read more books that sort of represent my own culture as well. But I've always been such a big fan of fantasy. So honestly, it's like this whole panel, for example, is like kismet, it's like fate. I'm so excited to be here with both of you because I'm genuinely such a big fan of your work and a big fan of the power of fantasy and like really excited to see the future of Pakistani fantasy and fantastical stories with Pakistani themes. So yay.
It's the dream.
Very excited about that too.
So for our audience, just a quick breakdown of the format. So first, I'll be asking Maida and Emily a few questions, and then we will have opportunities for questions from the audience. As a reminder to our audience, there is a Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom screen, and you can use that to submit any questions that you have for Maida and or Emily. I'll remind you again a little later, but let's get started. So for anyone who hasn't yet read your books, Maida and Emily, would you mind telling us a bit about them, preferably without spoilers?
For sure. I can go first, if that's okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I love to say this about all my books. Here's Amir. If you love Ghibli movies and you want a cozy read to read by the fire, then I think my books are perfect for you. So this one specifically is Amir and the Jinn Princess. It's the second book in the Realm of Jinn series, but it stands alone, so you don't have to read any of the other books in the series. And it follows two characters, Amir, who is the potential heir of a wealthy Pakistani company, and Shamsa, who is the princess to a magical Jinn kingdom. And they become reluctant allies when Amir wants to find his missing mother, while the Jinn princess needs Amir's help to win the throne. But there's a terrible secret lurking beneath everything, and it could shatter the very alliance they have.
Okay, that pitch was so
Right.
fierce. I feel like I can't follow that. That's like, oh God, of course she wanted to go first. I'm an Emily Varga, and I wrote For She Is Wrath. Oh, it's blurring it out. There we go. For She Is Wrath.
There we go.
And For She Is Wrath is a Pakistani Count of Monte Cristo retelling. It follows Danya, a girl who gets falsely imprisoned for a crime she did not commit. She breaks out of prison with her best friend Noor, in order to get revenge on those who put her there, including her ex-boyfriend who betrayed her and put her in prison. So it's a juicy revenge, female rage tale meets a Kill Bill-esque YA fantasy.
Ooh.
You killed it with those comps.
Just the book I want to read, basically.
Honestly, I was just going to say, I've read both of these books, but you've sold me again. So we'll start off a little soft. We'll start off easy, and just because I just had dinner. But food and descriptions of food, especially Pakistani dishes, are really prevalent in both of your books. They're evocative and mouth-wateringly done. I was craving all kinds of food while reading both these books. So because of that, I have two food-related questions. First, what is your favorite Pakistani dish? And then second, what's your favorite fuel for when you're writing? Like, what do you love to eat or drink when you're writing? So we'll start off with Emily.
Oh, okay. So you've really like that food and fantasy books is like my favorite aspect of a fantasy world. I sometimes I read a fantasy and like they just like, have like boiled chicken or like something like so basic. And I'm like, really? Like this is literally a made up world. And like you couldn't do anything more exciting like with your spices. Come on. So no, it is definitely one of my favorite things about drafting fantasy. Of course, I wanted to bring a food aspect into this book. Like obviously, I love Pakistani food. It's such a big part of our culture. And so yeah, oh, the question was what my favorite dish is. I really love I think I mentioned it. Well, I love biryani in all forms. Like, so that's like it's a boring answer, but it's my favorite answer. But I think I mentioned it like what my favorite dish is right in the early chapter of the book because Danya is craving it when she's in prison, like just basically having gruel. And I think she wants her grandmother's like earthy mutton karahi like to eat. Like and I was like, what would I crave? Like if I was like in prison, like what do I want? I want like a stew, right? Like I want like something with tons and tons of flavor. And like that was the one.
My mouth is watering, and my mouth
Yeah.
was literally watering when you were, yeah, I was like, I want lamb right now.
And then what do I eat while I'm writing or reading? Like honestly, I love just like drinking tea and like I'm not like huge snacker while I'm drafting, but like if I was to, I'm definitely a salty girl over sweet, so like a bag of chips or something.
Love it. And Maya, what's your favorite Pakistani dish? And
I just have
what
to
fuels your writing?
I have to preface this by also saying I'm a much bigger savory fan than I am a
Hmm.
sweet person.
Yes,
But when
agree.
it comes to like Pakistani food, I also really like the rice dishes. Instead of
Mhm.
biryani, I might be more of like a like lamb or chicken plow girl instead. But
Mm,
biryani is amazing. I just really love the brothiness of plow. But I wanted to give a shout out to the desserts, the Pakistani desserts
mm.
in Thai, because I know Noura was obsessed with gulab jamun,
Oh
and all
yeah.
of her like yearning for gulab jamun was literally just me being hungry and craving gulab jamun as well. It's my favorite in Thai. And I definitely think everybody should try it. After I found out that like my editor, my agent, so many people started eating gulab jamun after they read. So I feel like I'm doing God's work by getting people
You
to
definitely are.
gulab jamun. And for what I drink or what I consume, I actually have it with me right now. I think I just like inhale chai all the time. Like it's part of my bloodstream at this point. Uh,
Hmm.
but yes, chai or any sort of green herbal tea.
Yeah, that's me, green herbal tea.
Love that. Okay, petition to take a quick break. We'll eat some mithai. We'll come back. I too am team pulao over biryani, but I do love a good biryani.
Mm.
Um, so moving on to the meat and potatoes. I'm so sorry.
Too many food things. Now I'm starving.
Um, for both of you, what was the first Pakistani folk tale that you heard? And
Mm.
what are some of your favorite Pakistani folk tales? So maybe we'll start with you, Maida.
I don't know if this is exclusively Pakistani, but it's a Pakistani folktale that my dad would always tell us, and it's The King and His Daughters. And it's basically a folktale about this king who has three daughters, and the first two always like flatter him. Um, basically, they give him all these metaphors like, you're like sweets, you're like gold, you're the best father in the world, and they basically like really lay on thickly how much they love him. Whereas the youngest daughter um, tells him that he's like salt, and for him, that's an insult. He doesn't understand why this daughter isn't flattering him as much as the other ones. But then years later, down the line, when he has this grand feast, he isn't able to have any of the food with salt in it. There's no salt in his feast, and then he realizes the importance of salt and that his youngest daughter was basically saying how essential he is to their life. And I think the reason my dad always brought this folktale up is because he also has three daughters. It's just me and my two older
Mhm.
sisters, and I'm the youngest daughter. But I will not claim to be as humble as this story. But I think it really hit home specifically for my family and my background, and just sort of like the message of understanding, keeping it simple, keeping it humble, and recognizing that like family is just a very important part, and you should
Mm.
always try to keep it together and not sugarcoat things.
I love
Love
that.
that.
Um, Favorite, like, I mean, I love all of, I love with folklore how it crosses into so many different types of cultures. And so you can have similar tales, in like Celtic mythology as you can in like Pakistani or South Asian mythology or in German mythology, German like fairy tales, for example. I really, really loved stories about like Perry's like Fae in Pakistan. I thought that it was really cool. But the one that's coming to mind now that I loved when I was a kid is that we have a kind of version of the Frog Princess. I don't know if you've heard this one, and it's like I think this like king has like a bunch of sons. I can't remember how many now off the top of my head, but and they all have to like do this competition to see who they're going to marry. And so they like release arrows into different parts of the kingdom, and whoever, wherever their arrow lands, that's like where they like marry someone. And the youngest prince is like not good at anything, I guess. Like, and this is a Punjabi folklore kind of tale, which is where my dad is from. And so I always found it interesting because it's like that twist. And I loved Grimm's fairy tales growing up, which has a frog princess thing. Sorry, I'm rambling now. Let's get back to the tale. So the youngest prince is not like really good at anything. And so he's bad at archery and he like lets it go, like lets his arrow go and it just like hits this like clay pot that's like nearby. And there's like this frog in it. And so the king is like, well, you have to marry the frog. And like the prince is like, no, like, okay. So he's like, he's steadfast and he like obeys his, dad and he marries the frog. And then soon it's time for the king to choose his successor. And so he has the same kind of like competition style situation, which you can really see the threads of like how fairy tales and stuff kind of build on that too, which I love. He has all the sons like do different like tasks. Like I think one is to make like a beautiful coat, like if I'm remembering correctly. And so the son is like kind of lamenting to his like frog girl, frog bride. And she's like, okay, okay, I got you. Like, let me get all my friends and like we're gonna make like this like big, like beautiful coat kind of thing. And they do, and it's like stunning. And all of the other like wives and princes are like, what? How did you do this? Right. And then the next, I mean, I think there's a bunch of different trials, but one of the trials is okay, like whoever has, I think, the most beautiful like bride or something like that. And everyone's like, well, of course, the youngest prince is not going to win that because he's married to a frog. And then the frog like confesses to him, like, hey, I'm actually a princess that's been like changed by like a wicked magician. You could undo the spell. And I think it's something weird, like taking out a nail from her head or something. It's like by doing this thing. And he does. And she obviously turns into a beautiful princess. And he brings her to all the trials. And of course, the youngest prince wins the successor and he rules like wisely and happily. And I really liked that one because I feel like what I found so strange when I was younger was that like he um he really like listened to his frog bride. Like I was like,
Yeah.
this is so great. Like he's like, like I'm never gonna win this. Like, so he was like really talking to her and they were like chatting, okay, how can we win this kind of thing? And I was like, I kind of love this like aspect. Like someone needs to write this in a book because like it was not just, like the prince kind of doing everything. It was really the frog bride who came in and like stole the show kind of thing. And I liked that. And I liked how in the end, it wasn't like someone who was like best at everything. He was kind of like the underdog that like won the day, which I love. I love a good underdog story. So yeah.
That sounds like a very distant, abridged version of Amir and the Jinn Princess
Really?
Yeah, it
Oh
sounds
my God, you're
like as
right.
you were describing it, I
Oh
was
my
like,
God.
trials. I was like, they're fighting for the throne.
Yes.
To compete with all his siblings. I was like, why is this reminding me of Amir?
Yeah. Well, but that's just shows you, right? Like folklore and tales, like they build upon like the same kind of storytelling that's existed for millennia in so many different cultures and countries. And
You know what
like
I think it is also? I feel
yeah.
like sibling rivalries are
Yes.
Yeah,
And a good competition, you can
yes,
never go
totally.
wrong.
yes.
Hmm.
And I feel like as a middle child, I'm noticing a theme of like justice for the youngest kid here. Where are the middle child stories?
I'm an eldest child, so
Okay.
maybe.
We have all three, eldest,
Yeah.
middle, youngest.
So, are there any Pakistani writers that you've read in the past who you feel have really stuck with you or inspired your writing?
Yeah, I was really impacted by Mohsin Hamid. like again, he's like quite a big Pakistani author, but I remember like reading his first book. I think it's Moth Smoke. And it's like it was like one of the first kind of like books that I've read like in English, like set in kind of like a modern Pakistan. And I really liked the exploration of characters and people and the conflicts and there's such a great twist at the end as well.
Sorry, I think we lost.
Yes, Mohsin Hamid, and it was his Exit West book, which is like a
Yeah,
stunning.
I
Oh,
read that one too.
did I cut out or was it okay?
So I think it could have been me. Oh no, Emily, you froze for a moment, but we caught you at
Oh,
the end of
sorry.
that. No, no,
I'll
no, it's
repeat my
okay.
answer. Yeah, like basically Exit West was in Obama's like list of books he
Yeah.
read that year and like it was just like a stunning kind of discussion about immigration and like asylum seekers and like what you do when the country that you live in is no longer safe and like how do you make sure that your family is safe, but in almost a fantastical way. I mean, the basis of the
Mhm.
story is that there's magical doorways all around that lead to other countries and other places. And then people start to catch on. There's these doorways, when there's people from countries where governments or, forces it's not safe to live there anymore. They start using the doorways to travel to other places. And then people start monitoring the doorways. They start monetizing the doorways. And it's just was such a wonderful book. I highly recommend it. I was so inspired to see a Pakistani author writing these super powerful books. And also he like narrates them himself in audiobook, which is excellent. High recommend. Yeah.
Love that.
Mhm. I also read Exit West, and I think it is a great coming of age story. I feel like, though written in a very like different time period, a
Mhm.
lot of the same experiences I've also felt in my day-to-day life as an immigrant. But I wanted
Mm,
to give a shout out to Usman T. Malik, who is
mm.
a Pakistani writer, who wrote the short story collection Midnight Doorways.
Yes,
It's
I
like
love
a
that one.
horror short story collection. Definitely recommend it to older audiences. There's some like really strange, really interesting types of like subversive messages in these folk tales. There's one about a daughter who's suffering from polo who falls in love in this alleyway with this cart seller, and then the horror that comes from that. There's just so many different aspects of Pakistani culture and the different types of love, the different types of experiences with, either between parent and child or lover and lover. So there's a lot of really interesting stories. And I think, like, if not all of them, you'll love at least one of them. And I actually got to meet him
Oh,
last
wow.
That's so
summer
cool.
at this writing workshop that I was attending. He was one of the instructors there, and he is as amazing as his stories, even better. So I definitely recommend people to check out his short story collection. I think he said he's going to come out with a novel sometime soon. So I'm really hoping that happens.
Yeah, that would be amazing.
Amazing. I'm I have both of these authors' books sitting upstairs, and I had not read either of them. Now I'm like, okay, I know what I'm doing after this. So, how did you find yourself getting into writing fantasy? Were you both fantasy readers before? What drew you to writing fantasy? And we could start with you, Emily.
Yeah, so I kind of started out writing with the pursuit of publication, um writing historical romance novels, so very different. I was a big historical romance reader. I really, really adored them. And I have probably about 7 trunked romance novels like in my office. But I my dad was a big fantasy reader. He adored like Dune and Lord of the Rings and those like kind of classic sci-fi fantasy books. And so he was never going to read my historical romance novels, to be honest. But he got diagnosed with cancer, and I decided to start writing a fantasy for him, and kind of to chat with him about stuff. And it really just once I started, I was like, oh wow, like I adore this. And like perhaps that's what I always adored about writing historical romance, because it was like creating your own world, albeit within the confines of history. Whereas this was like it's research, but there's different research, and then you could control something, right? If you want to throw magic in, you could control that. And if you want to throw, where your world is and what it looks like, and if there's a palace and that sort of thing, you can control it. And I really, really loved that. And so I wrote my first full fantasy novel, and I pitched it to a mentorship program called Pitch Wars. It doesn't exist anymore, but I thought, okay, let's see where this goes. And I happened to get into Pitch Wars, which is amazing. So I had a mentor me, and they went through the entire magic system with me, like tore it out, and like we built it from the ground up. And that taught me so, so much. Um, and so I knew after putting in all that work into the manuscript, like this was I wanted to be a fantasy writer. I just loved it. I always had read fantasy, but I had never thought that I was skilled enough to actually write it. And so when I decided to query for agents, I used that manuscript, and then yeah, the rest is history. Got my agents, went on submission with a different book, but eventually sold by fantasy, and yeah, that's it for me. I love it.
I love that story so much. I love that it wasn't where you thought you saw yourself and then you found yourself
Yeah.
here. And I love that. And Maida, how about you? What drew you to writing fantasy?
For me, I don't even think it was a question. I think I never, when I started writing, I never thought about necessarily getting published. It was more I wanted to emulate what I was like witnessing in movies and books.
Mm.
I loved how there was a completely new world that I could escape to. Um, and I thought, even while I was watching shows or movies like Narnia, I was like, I love this world, but there are still some things that I would change about it. And I was
Mm.
like, well, I can't change the story in this movie or in this book, but I could do it on my own. And so I started writing out some like really weird, really bad fantasy novels when I was a kid. And then as I got older and I was getting more in touch with my culture again, and also like Emily said, trying to like reach out to your parents and try to extend this like bridge of communication with them. I wanted to write a fantasy story inspired by Pakistani culture and the customs and the folklore. So that's how I wrote Noor and the Immortal Palace and Amir and the Jinn Princess. But even within these two stories, I wanted it to feel like any kid can find their way into this magical realm. Like I mentioned Narnia before, it left such a lasting impression on me because as a kid, I wanted to do the exact same thing those kids were doing. I wanted to escape. I found the real world very, very boring. I don't think it's as boring now as an adult. I think the real world has a lot more layers now as an adult, but as a kid, when you live in this very small bubble, you're like, well, what else can I do? What magic is there in the world? And so I wanted to create that same feeling for brown kids because I never really saw it in any of the childhood movies or childhood books that I read. So I wanted to do the same things for people or kids who look like me. And
Mhm.
so using that sort of Alice in Wonderland, Narnia recipe of diving into this like hidden underground world, I created the realm of Jinn, where it's magical, it's immersive, but at the same time, it is dark, it is twisted.
Mm.
And I think for me, especially when I'm world building, I want the fantasy world to still be a sort of mirror to our real world.
Mm.
And I want the characters and the reader to basically have a safe space within this fantastical world to adventure and explore new emotions, to be able to understand the issues and problems we face in the real world, but with this veil or guise of fantasy. And so that's what I, really set out to do with the Realm of Jinn series. And I hope, readers really connect to it in that way. But it really just came down to wanting to connect back to my culture, um, and wanting to do the same things for kids and brown kids who look like me in a fantasy world.
Mm. I hear that.
That's incredible. And just a quick reminder to everybody in the audience that you can also submit your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. You can insert as many questions as you'd like, and then as we get to the end of our questions, I will be taking some questions from the audience. Maiva, I love that you talked a little bit about your world building, and I thought the realm of the gym that you built was so fascinating and such a cool, like hidden world within our world. And Emily, like with your world, it was one world, but I was so fascinated by like these incredibly like powerful systems of magic that you built, and like your whole
Mm.
um the systems of magic and what you could do with it was so fascinating and intriguing to me. And I was just curious if you had anything you wanted to add about how you approach your world building or where that
Mhm.
came from.
Well, magic systems, I had briefly touched on how I did a mentorship program with a previous novel, and we kind of built it from the ground, the magic system from the ground up. And what I really learned through that process was similar to what Maida was saying, just having it connect to everything. It mirrors our world in some way. Like the magic has to be, or for me, has to connect to the themes to make it that much more compelling. Um, because it's a Count of Monte Cristo retelling, the themes were, forgiveness, hope, vengeance, the toll that revenge can take and the limits of human justice. All of those things I wanted to explore with the magic system as well. I did use Jinn magic in this situation because bargains are in a lot of folklore with Jinn. I wanted to explore that bargain kind of magic. I love bargains in YA fantasy. I think Holly Black does them marvelously, right, with her Fae bargains. But in this instance, it was an emperor who bargains for Jinn power in order to, have more power in his own world. And of course, I had to make that power have a cost because, revenge has a cost. Like if you're sacrificing everything for power, that has a cost. On both, your conscience, your soul, your physical body. So every time Danya consumed this Jinn magic, um, it had a physical toll on her, the same way that the pursuit of vengeance, and sacrificing everything else would as well. So I really like, and I find the magic systems to be the most compelling when they are connected to the themes, when they are connected to the character's wound in some way or the character's wants and desires. That it isn't just this amorphous thing that anyone can just do magic, that it is there's a reason why we're following this character in this world with these, with this conflict because, it's that magic is inherent to the theme of and the overarching like arc of the story. Yeah.
I love that. I love the concept of magic having a cost because these
Mm.
things in real life have a cost too. I think that's
Yeah.
really beautifully said. Um, Actually, that I feel like that segues in really nicely. Both of your books have these really profound messages woven into them. So, Maida, you
Yeah.
talked about, sorry, in your books that you explore concepts like labor, capitalism, class, the illusion of choice. Emily, your book explores the ways that power corrupts and the ways that
Mm.
vengeance and rage can corrupt us and ways we can find our ways to forgiveness. Uh, Maya, I know you talked about this a little, but I'd love to give you a chance to expand, and then Emily, you as well. But what led you to choose fantasy as your vehicle to share these messages, of these very real world messages in this fantastical setting or world?
Yeah. So, I mean, I got a lot of different kinds of pushback when I sort of pitched the idea of a children's book that discussed child labor.
Mm.
Um, I think what I've read about child labor and what I've watched documentary wise on child labor, it's often an adult telling you about the details. It's an adult, you know, going to these construction sites, talking to the children, and then relaying it to, again, another adult audience.
Mm.
And so, what I wanted to do is I wanted to bring the victims of child labor to the forefront, which are the children. And I wanted to write a story from their perspective. The only problem is, I'm not sure how many children would necessarily pick up a book that is entirely, a story about child labor. And so for me, as a longtime fantasy fan, it wasn't even like a question for me. I was like, I want to write a fantasy book, but I also want to write a book about child labor because I want more people to be aware of what's happening. So why not blend the two together? And so I decided, okay, I'll write a fantasy novel about child laborers, but also give them the chance to still be kids and still have an adventure. And on this adventure, to learn about the issues and the problems in their situation and potentially on how to overcome it as well. And so for me, and I guess for readers in general, I think fantasy can be such a beautiful veil for what's hidden underneath and basically providing readers as well as the characters with a space that they feel comfortable enough to explore these issues, even explore their own um, like their own personal problems, their own emotions that they're facing. I think there's so many amazing middle grade books out there that deal with a whole variety of issues a child faces. And I'm really glad that is happening because I think it's always I think at the end of the day people think it's an adult issue. It's always, it should be writing from the perspective of an adult to another adult. But I think kids are so intelligent, so smart, and they can even help these issues and these problems now, even from their young age. I think of, Save the Children, and that was a organization that started with a bunch of kids. So I really wanted to provide that sort of safe space. And I think the best way to do that and the best way to get a larger audience's attention to this is to, make it about an adventure because we all love adventures. And I just wanted to give these children also who, their day to day life is working as a child laborer, but they deserve to still be children and they deserve their own adventure. And I thought a magical adventure would be the best way to tell it.
I love that. That's
Yeah,
really powerful.
I'm similar to Maida in terms of I think that I've gotten a similar kind of question. My book just came out on Tuesday, so I've had a lot of panels and stuff since then. So I've gotten that similar question, and I think that people do underestimate um, teens and youth and younger readers in that they can't explore or deal with darkness, and we shouldn't be talking about dark themes because it's too much for them or something like that. Which, like, I used to be a teen, so I know that there's a lot of darkness there, right? But also I think that does blah. I think that does a disservice to youth, to teen readers, to young readers who want to explore those themes, want to see my book as, as you mentioned, about rage, about female rage, about the corruption of power. Um, and, there are young girls out there reading and they have rage, they have anger, and that it should be shown that that's okay, that you can express that anger. You shouldn't always be told to smile and be pleasing and agreeable. And so that was something that was really important to me, exploring dark themes. If you're saying that teens shouldn't read that it does a disservice to them, I think.
Mm, well said. Really well said. I feel like the soapbox the hill that I would die on is like
Mhm.
children and teenagers can understand difficult and
Mhm.
complicated things, and
Mhm.
it's unfair for us as adults uh, to sort of like view it as, oh, they don't understand, or they couldn't understand, they couldn't possibly feel the depth of this feeling, when
Mhm.
realistically I think about this a lot when you're a teenager, especially when you're young, you're going through everything for the first time, and everything's amplified, and everything's the end of the world. And I think that sort of sense of severity, I guess, for lack of a
Mhm.
better word, is something that we do hold dear. Like as a teenager, as a child, you have these big feelings. You might not have the same language as an adult or the same context as an adult, but you still have that same
Yeah.
feeling, that same base understanding. And that's why I love that we're talking about kids books and teen books together, because I think
Yeah.
there's so much power here for all readers of all ages. But I love that we're gearing these books to younger readers.
Mhm. I agree.
Um, so I wanted to ask you each a little question about your book. So Emily, in For She Is Wrath, you build off of multiple existing mythologies. So it's a retelling of the Count of Monte Cristo, but you've also woven in like Jinn mythology. What kind of responsibility do you feel to the original stories or the folk legends or mythologies that you're, I
Using.
guess, using? Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I think it's a lot of pressure, certainly with a retelling, because with a retelling, there's people, it's beloved for a reason, right? It's a classic for a reason. And so people have an idea of how, the book should be, the story should be. But it's also a 1,200-page novel that I had to reduce down to a YA fantasy gender flipped world. So it's gonna be different, right? So what I can say is that what I really try to do with both when I use research for like using folklore and mythology, or if I'm using a particular folklore tale, um, or if I'm retelling a classic novel, is try to keep the core of the theme or lesson, or you know um, the core of what the story is kind of about in the forefront of my retelling or my version. So with the Count of Monte Cristo, I mean, I kind of discussed the themes with that, limits of human justice, like hope, forgiveness. I really tried to keep those core themes so that even if I reduced a section or cut out, kind of big storylines to keep it a tight YA fantasy novel, I felt it was still true to the heart of the story, the
Mm,
heart of the novel. Same with, I think, I mean, there's, like you said, a big responsibility when you're using folklore, Um, and I did a ton of different research into, different Jinn stories, different Jinn powers, how they've been used in other stories. I tried to keep the heart of and the core of what um, I kind of had felt the research was and the stories were in the Jinn that I created. So it's, one thing you have a poetic license, you can it's a fantastical world, you're creating something. But I think it's important to try and keep a core of what is true from folklore or mythology or the classic retelling that you're using, because there's a reason why people are so passionate about those stories. There's a reason why they've existed for so long, or they've been, in our zeitgeist, because people love them and they love the core of that. And I think it's a good thing, but it's also a responsibility to keep the core and the heart of that story.
Totally agreed. And honestly, I think, I mean, I have not read The Count of Monte Cristo, but I'm familiar with the story. And I think that, um, I think there's a reason that retellings work so well, right? Like um, different audiences sort of crave different things. And I just wanted to really quickly remind everybody that if they have any questions for Maida and Emily, you can submit them in the Q&A box. But in the meantime, I have more questions for both of you. So Maida, I love that both of your books depicted jinns in this really multifaceted way. They're not innately good or innately bad. They're unique. They each have their own dreams and personalities and flaws. And without spoilers, that means that the real villains in your stories can often be unexpected. Why was it important for you to build out these characters and specifically these villains that perhaps challenge popular expectations?
Yeah, I think Jim themselves are a really interesting concept because as I was doing more research into Jinn, I find that a lot of cultures actually have a very similar kind of trickster spirit. The Japanese have yokai. The Indians also have their own spirit as well. So it's very interesting to me that there's sort of like this cross-cultural being that are very similar to Jinn. And I thought, what does this really mean? Like if so many different cultures has this kind of trickster being, what are they really trying to say with this kind of concept? And it led me to basically believe that these jinn are very much our own inner demons, our own mirrors to what our subconscious is telling us. Even as a child, my mom would always tell me, whatever bad thing you're thinking about doing, that's a jinn whispering to you, that's a jinn influencing you. So it is almost as if jinn are the darker versions of ourselves, the ones that are able to, release their subconscious, you know, basically be able to pursue the darker desires that we don't allow ourselves to. And so they're very multifaceted beings. And how I wanted to depict them in my stories was to basically almost be alter egos or almost be foils to the characters themselves, in the sense that these jinn were doing what the characters wanted to do, but in a very twisted sense. So it's almost as if the characters had to kind of figure out, how can I pursue my desires, but on my own terms? How can I do what I want to do, but in a way that feels true to me, and to not let these, darker desires run wild? Um, so for me, Jen kind of became, a really interesting introspective mirror to who we are as people.
Oh my God, Maida, I love that. I love
Agreed.
that just description of Jin as being like a reflection of our darker selves. Like, like I was like, when you said that, I was like,
Oh
oh,
yeah.
I feel that. I feel that so much.
I really love that both of you depicted jinns in your books and you did them so differently. And I was curious if there were, well, Emily, I think you touch on a few other creatures, but I was curious if there were any other creatures or figures from myth or folklore, especially Pakistani myth or folklore, that you'd like to incorporate in a future story or future work.
Yeah, I did touch on Halmasti. There's like quite a few, especially like in I love Chitrali folklore because they deal with so many different kind of Pakistani creatures, and I just feel like it's just ripe for so many fantasy stories that we haven't seen out
Mhm.
there. And I think it would be awesome to get, some of these stories out there, and there's some Punjabi characters and stuff I would kind of love to Punjabi creatures that I would love to kind of incorporate. Um, my next book is dealing with the world of like the Paris, the Paris, the Fae. I think there's such rich folklore with them and mythology and kind of stories so yeah, I'm already kind of playing around with that, and it's been really, really fun to research and kind of go into that. But yeah, I love when fantasy novels just even have sprinklings in of stuff like where you're mentioning it like in the book Danya says that it's because her father traveled to the north and he saw a Halmasti, which is kind of like a what I understand to be like a dire wolf kind of situation and
Mhm.
in Pakistan. But and so he carved a dagger with the head of a Halmasti, and that becomes kind of an iconic blade for her because her father was a swordsmith and she really, really loves and values swords and weaponry. So I love when that is sprinkled in and it just I think makes the world richer. And so yeah, of course I would love to incorporate, tons more from my research into future books. It's just beautiful stories and beautiful creatures, and they overlap with so many other kind of mythological creatures and stories. So yeah, I think that they're both new and exciting, but also relatable and accessible for many people who don't know about them.
Totally agreed. And how about you, Maida?
I really want to write a story about trails in the
Oh,
future, right? They're sort of like these back-footed witches or seductresses. And I feel like these sort of seductive folklore characters always get a bad rep. You know, we see it with
mm,
sirens, see it with other characters, and I'm like, what about their story? I know that there are so many more layers to this, monster in a sense. And I think like when it comes to rails in a Pakistani setting, they're very commonplace, very much talked about, almost like warned about in the culture. So I would love to write like a very strange, very kooky sort of short story about maybe just like a day in the life of a trail. I think that would be really funny and really interesting.
I love that. I'm like, she's just trying to get her groceries, and people just keep like, ah.
What I
Please.
love about Shirelles too is that there was like all of this kind of mythology around like women who died in childbirth and things like that, and like kind of the darkness of like kind of them being mothers. And I thought
Mm,
that's so interesting that they were kind of perceived as these like dark witches. And I'm like,
mm,
wow, like this, and yet it had such a kind of background of this kind of real thing that's still happening
yeah,
in our world today. Like, so yeah, I would love to read that, Maida. I expect it in
yeah.
my inbox.
I got you.
Honestly, and Emily, like buddies and like the concept of fae and fairies, like I found my way to Holly
Holly
Black,
Black.
like because I was always obsessed with like my grandfather used to call it my sister and I like buddies and stuff, and I was just so fascinated
Mhm.
by fae culture, especially when I learned they weren't like boring, like goody, like like
Mm.
I loved learning that they were tricky and like you couldn't really trust them and they were shifty. So I am going to need you both to just get me these books ASAP. I cannot wait to read them. um,
Yeah.
And I guess I was going to ask you both what you were working on next. And I know you mentioned about what you're working on, but is there anything else we can expect from you? I know your book literally just came out last week. Congratulations, by the way.
Like under a week ago.
Yeah.
I know, and I've been seeing all the amazing buzz about it. Congrats, Emily.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm happy that people seem to be liking it, and no one is like coming for me for doing a retelling of a Dumas, like a beloved Dumas story. Yeah, no, that my next book with Wednesday Books is coming out is about Paris and kind of Pakistani fae. It actually does have churels in it, like just a twist on um what I won't get too into it, but it's kind of a story about colonialism. I pitched it as Akatar meets Indiana Jones because she's like a relic hunter,
Sold.
and a scholar who travels into the Fae world in order to get a relic to bring back magic to her world to defeat her, like this colonizer country that's taken over. Um, and that is what's next, what's coming out. It's titled The River She Became. And we will see how that goes with deadlines and things. I'm very in awe of Maida for already having the 2 books out because it is hard.
It is very difficult. I will say that.
And what are you working on, Maida? Can you tell us anything about what's
I
next?
can't say too much.
Okay.
I am diving into the adult fantasy space. I have a adult fantasy planned around sort of this expedition that goes astray. There's also just like these really weird things that are happening in this place that these characters are exploring. Think very much akin to Annihilation by Jeff
Okay.
Vandermeer. Yeah, just a lot of strange things that are going to
Okay, I
happen.
love that comp. That's like my catnip. I want to read that too.
Well, you've both been so lovely. And to all of our listeners, all of our viewers on YouTube and on Zoom, please do not forget to pick up these books if you haven't already. Amir and the Jinn Princess is the second in the Realm of Jinn series by M.T. Khan or Maida Khan. And For She Is Wrath is Emily Varga's debut teen fantasy, teen romantasy, which had me a little hot under the collar, let me just say. So thank you both so much for your time. It was a pleasure reading your books, and it was a pleasure chatting with both of you.
Thank you for having us. I gotta say, when I got the topic of the panel, I was so excited because I like I've never talked on something like this before, and when I was a teen, this is something like I needed, right? Like, and
Agree.
so yeah, this was a really, really amazing thing to do, and I'm so glad I got to be on this panel with you guys.
Me too.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me as well. And I want to echo Emily's sentiment too that there's a lot of sort of general diversity panels, but to see a panel that is so specific to Pakistan is such an amazing thing. And I'm so glad we made it here. So thank you so much.
This is for our teenage selves.
Yes.
Exactly.
I will do a final thank you. You're thanking all of each other, but on behalf of Fold, I will say thank you to Maida, Emily, and Ameema, and to all of our viewers. We thank you for being here. The recordings from the festival will be available to watch and rewatch until December the 9th, or until the end of the school year for school board pass holders. If you are looking for copies of these amazing books and all of our festival titles, please check out Tin Lids. You can buy them through our official bookseller for schools and libraries. Our library in the virtual clubhouse is filled with resources such as our educator guide, the festival program, as well as author videos and other bonus items. Be sure to visit spaces like the exhibitor hall and complete the scavenger hunt to gain points towards the leaderboard. The more points you get, the better your chances are at winning prizes like a Fold Kids author visit. We love to see classes and families enjoying the event, so please share a picture or something that you've learned by using the hashtag FoldKids24. Thank you again for joining us. Bye.